Spanish is a beautiful language, and just like Italian, French, and a number of others, it is a part of the Romance language family. Now, as I've mentioned in another video, if we're talking about native speakers, Spanish is the second most spoken language in the entire world behind Chinese. And contrary to popular belief, once you know a few tips and grammatical rules, it's actually quite easy to learn. Today, through the beginning of the Gospel of John, I'm going to teach you some of those tips and rules so that you can begin reading and understanding Spanish this very day. So stay with me. Hello amigos, Roberto here, and welcome to Missionali, where we study the Bible, we live it, and we share it with the world. Now, before we actually get into today's passage, let me go over a few helpful pronunciation tips. Number one, whenever you see the letter Y by itself, it simply means and. It's pronounced like the English double E, so the sound is E. Number two, whenever you see two L's in a word, they are pronounced like the letter Y. For example, this word is pronounced brilla, and as you can see, I put the phonetic equivalent underneath. Tip number three, whenever you see an accent over a letter, that is where the stress of the pronunciation will be. For example, this word would not be pronounced existia, but instead existia because the accent is over the second I. Finally, let's go over the sounds of the 5 vowels, which basically never change, by the way. I'll put the English equivalent next to the letter so you can get an idea of what the sound should be like. Each sound should be pronounced in a short, crisp manner. A, E, I, O, U. Now, let's see what those letters sound like in words. Estaba, verbo, vida, con, luz. Now, I'm going to read from the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 1, using the NBLA version, La Nueva Biblia de las Américas. I will use a slightly slower cadence and then teach you a few grammatical tips and word translations that will help you read this verse in no time by yourself. Now, I'll do the same for verses 2 through 5. Now, as a quick tip, using an app like the Bible Gateway and then placing the English and Spanish Bible side by side is also a very helpful way to learn Spanish. So now, without further explanation, let's begin. En el principio ya existía el verbo, y el verbo estaba con Dios, y el verbo era Dios. The first thing to notice is the word el, which is scattered throughout the verse. This simply translates into the word the. Next, we see the word verbo, and as you can probably guess, it means verb. In the English Bible, this is actually rendered as word. Now, when you see a word that begins with the letter V, do not pronounce it with a hard V sound like verbo, but instead make it a soft V sound like verbo, or even a B as in boy sound like verbo. The final word I'll mention here is Dios, which means God. An easy way to learn how to pronounce this one is by initially making it 2 words, di and os, Dios, and then simply saying it faster, Dios, Dios. Got it? Excelente. Now, let's move on to verse 2. Él estaba en el principio con Dios. At the beginning of verse 2, you see the word el, and you may be asking yourself, why isn't this translated into the word the? Well, whenever you see the word el with an accent over the E, the word becomes he or him. In this case, it is he because it's at the beginning of the sentence and it's a subject. In another verse, we'll see an example of when this is translated as him. Now, a very common word that is used regularly in everyday language and that we also find in this verse is con, and it simply means with. All clear so far, amigos? Very good. Let's continue with verse 3. Todas las cosas fueron hechas por medio de él, y sin él nada de lo que ha sido hecho fue hecho. Here we see the word el twice and it means him, because it is an object pronoun versus a subject pronoun, like we saw in the previous verse. For example, all things were made through who? Through him, not he, and without who? Without him. Hopefully you can see the difference as you compare the English and Spanish versions. Next, we see two words that begin with the letter H, hechas and hecho. They both translate into the word made. In Spanish, the letter H is silent. Therefore, you begin your sound, in this case, with the letter E, hechas and hecho. And finally, let's look at the word sin. It simply means without, and is pronounced like the English sin. So far, so good. Let's move on to verse 4. En él estaba la vida, y la vida era la luz de los hombres. Here we see the word vida twice, and it means life. Notice there is an article in front of the word vida, la, which means the. It is placed there because vida ends with the letter A and is considered a feminine noun. If it was a masculine noun ending in O, for example, the word for the would be el, as we've already seen. Now, in English, you wouldn't say in him was the life, you would just simply say in him was life. In Spanish, you say la vida to refer to life in general. In the second instance, you use la vida again, even though here you're referring to a specific life, Jesus in this case. The word luz means light and is actually feminine even though it ends with a Z. That's why you have the feminine article la in front of it. This is just one of those that you have to know or memorize that it's feminine because it does not end with an A or an O. Now let's read the last verse. La luz brilla en las tinieblas, y las tinieblas no la comprendieron. Let me first focus on las tinieblas, which means darkness. Tinieblas is feminine and plural, and that's why the article in front of it is las, which agrees with it in gender and number. Now, typically the word translated darkness in Spanish is oscuridad, which means a state of being dark. Las tinieblas actually means much more than that. In this case, it is referring to an unholy darkness or evil. So it is more dramatic and nuanced than something just being dark. The word comprendieron, from the verb comprender, like comprehend, means to understand. In this verse, the darkness, this evil darkness, does not understand the light. In English, the word used instead of understand is overcome, which I actually prefer. In other words, the evil darkness cannot overcome the light, which is Jesus. Amen. Next, let's look at the word la before the word comprendieron. Previously, I said that this was the word for the because it preceded a noun that ended with the letter A. Here, it precedes a verb and is therefore a pronoun that is referring to la luz. Not only is la luz feminine, but it is also singular. So the pronoun that represents it has to be the same. Again, in Spanish, you have to be specific with gender and number. This is something that we'll continue to touch on as we go through more lessons, but for now, I think you get the idea. Now, obviously, I didn't translate every single word or explain every grammatical rule, but you should have sufficient material to work with for now. And since you now have a better understanding of what most of the verses mean and how they're put together, let me read the entire passage, verses 1 through 5, and I'm sure that you will actually understand it better than you thought you would. En el principio ya existía el verbo, y el verbo estaba con Dios, y el verbo era Dios. Él estaba en el principio con Dios. Todas las cosas fueron hechas por medio de Él, y sin Él, nada de lo que ha sido hecho fue hecho. En Él estaba la vida, y la vida era la luz de los hombres. La luz brilla en las tinieblas, y las tinieblas no la comprendieron. Amen. Well, dear friends, I hope that you found this lesson helpful and that you enjoyed it. If so, please give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with others. As always, mis amigos, thank you so much for watching, and Lord willing, I will see you in the next video.